All right, let's jump into it. So, welcome to Monthly Magic, everybody. As we were joking, this is the first monthly Magic recurring webinar. We've got thoughts and opinions, and we're doing all types of really cool things with AI. A bunch of people here have probably used our Magic AI tool. So thought that it would be really powerful from Mark and Matt, the two co-founders of Thread, who are spending a lot of time thinking about this. Um, riffing on different topics. So we'll have on a monthly basis different topics that we're digging into, whether it's tools that you should be looking at, new models that have come out, how we're thinking about the future, specific use cases. Super open. If you guys have thoughts on what future monthly magic topics should be, put them in the chat for sure. Maggie and our team helps coordinate a lot of that stuff, so feel free to riff on it with Maggie as well. So excited you guys are here.
Yeah, excited to dig in. And I think for those who might know or don't know, prior to Thread, Mark and I shared an office in New York City with an MSP by the name of RFA, and it felt oftentimes there when we were solving problems for our teams, for the company, and eventually for the industry. That energy, that idea generation, it felt like magic, right? We put a lot of work, a lot of thought and effort into those solutions, getting them into place. But like I said in my note, if I could harness that energy or bottle it, I would, because it resulted in a lot of outcomes and solutions for them, and what ultimately became Thread. So I think that, and the fact that we have a Magic AI product, those two concepts we wanted to put together.
It'll be a drinking game. I'll have a sip of coffee every time you say the word magic today.
Love it. Let's get started. So wanted to bring this up as a framing slide, as a starting point. We have been building AI integrations, products, features since the fall of 2022. And then soon thereafter in the spring is when Microsoft did this customer study on us, focused on the initial use case, which was time entry related, saving technicians time with every service request delivered. So we've been thinking about the problem space and ways that AI can deliver that value for quite a long time.
Yeah, we dubbed this slide the why you should listen to us slide, that we've had a little bit of experience with this. What's really cool, and nobody will believe us now, is that we've actually been trying to fix this problem before generative AI. We've always set aside a budget. We were still working at the MSP. The company was still called ChatGenie. We set aside a budget to hire someone with machine learning expertise. I think it was in like 2021. And we just started to try to test out, because we had growing amount of data, and it was just impossible. MSPs are just so different between one another that it was impossible to use any machine learning models to really try to pick up a pattern. And so when generative AI came around, before even ChatGPT, we started to play around with GPT. I think it was 3 that summer, and so we got this really great experience early on that I think Microsoft appreciated of taking a use case live. But it was just a great jump to see and how much value it can provide for our industry, because actually collectively we work much differently. I always joke that if you go to an American Chinese food restaurant anywhere in America, it'll probably have a more consistent menu than the MSPs across America. And I don't think they even have conferences like IT Nation to try to drive alignment. If they do, I'm definitely missing out. But we've been working out this problem for quite some time. And so we want to share a lot of those thoughts back with y'all.
Yeah. If they do have a conference, probably a pretty good menu. Yeah. So yeah, and I think what you're getting at is a really, really interesting point in terms of diversity of environment, complexity of environment. Each customer has, maybe a variation on a theme, but they have their unique flavor of that theme. And so when we're talking about partners and thinking through these problems, there's always that multi-tenant, multi-environment point of view. But then also, and we'll get into this here in a second, it creates some fragmentation if there's not a unified, I hate to use the word closed loop, but a unified integration across the entirety of the service experience.
That's right. And you know, we're sharing kind of starting very high level, or at least our first one. We do believe that IT is the new plumbing of America and countries abroad. It's just become so integral to everything. And I think this is why we're getting finally some spotlight on our industry. So we're seeing lots of outsourcing. We're seeing more people, you know, a younger working group that's using more software, expecting consumer grade types of experiences. And so it's a good time to be an MSP as the world needs IT more than ever.
That's right.
Especially your relatives that try to give you a laptop to fix for free. They need it more than ever.
Yeah, that's how you end up becoming an MSP, I think, in a lot of ways. But yeah, and with that, I think, you know, with that right place, right time mindset, there are challenges inherent in the model. And I think a lot of that is due to tickets, right? They prevent customers from getting help when and where they need it, just simply because it's designed to be a system of record, right? Not an experiential solution. As we get into here, what's the net result of that fragmentation? As we well know, something that the industry has been fighting against for quite some time. Whether it's adding headcount to control that fragmentation, or adding point solutions tooling to help with the experience, the combination of the two, it just makes it really difficult to grow the team profitably, certainly after a certain headcount.
Yeah, and it took us a lot of time to get to this thinking. I think we were both lucky that we were at RFA where it went from really small to quite large, 250 people, I think, by the time we left, if not more. But that's really what we've been really focused on. And I think we just want to provide some of the framing of the problems that we see within the MSP space. It's like everyone needs IT. We're trying to work at it. The hardest part is scaling it because we want to provide great service. And as we scale it, it just compresses our margins. Like the communication is too much. It's too much follow-up. Did you get back to that customer? Did you follow up internally? It's almost like what it took you as 10 people to handle in terms of customers. It doesn't scale the same. And so if you're the same 20 people can't scale twice the number of customers. It's not, if you were doing 30 customers on 10 people, you're not able to do 60 on 20. And so we've learned that as you scale, it becomes harder and harder to get all of that information organized. And so that's I think where our framing begins, Matt, right? In terms of how we think about the problem space, before jumping into the next part.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely. I think, again, you're either indexing on control over the experience, right? Making sure that every request is a ticket and that it follows your queue, and you know, we adhere to our SLAs. All of that's great. Doesn't necessarily result in an awesome experience because of the friction and the challenges that we highlighted before. Or if you're indexing on the experience side and taking a really strong experiential point of view, sometimes the control, sometimes the processes take a back seat. And it's a battle that we're seeing a lot of partners kind of grappling with quite a lot.
Yeah. It's weird, I gotta say, to be a little meta. We usually present to other people. Now that we're doing our first monthly one-on-one, it's like usually I'm trying to read off the other people's reaction, but now I have to read off your reaction, Matt. But yeah, that makes a ton of sense because we worked on the slide together. I think where you and I start to butt heads and it gets interesting, and what I'm excited to talk about is, should the AI talk to the customer, right?
Let's do it.
Well, or maybe we should kind of frame some of the AI opportunities first. I think Matt and I do take different point of views on it. But we could talk a little bit about how we're thinking about AI. So that's the problem space. Now, when we look at AI, we break it down into front office and back office, which is there any way to bring AI to help fix that problem of scale into either front office, which is the interaction with your customers, or back office, internal interactions. And so we broke it down into those two categories. And on the left side, you have the MSP side. It's you, your staff. And we break that down into two general roles, technicians and dispatchers. We think about dispatchers more like folks that are on triage. I think some companies do have dedicated dispatchers, like we did at RFA. Quite a few of them, maybe too many of them. And then as you go on the front office side, it's your customers. And the two roles we see there are IT side contacts, the one that typically own the contract or are key stakeholder in that relationship, aka the ones you don't want to piss off to not experience churn. And then you have the end users, which, typically I think as an industry, we budget one request per every 2 months from them, like 0.5 requests per month. These are the ones where you're making the majority of your revenue on, because you're multiplying it per user pricing by that end user. You want to talk about your favorite side, Matt? Why don't you talk more about the back office side, and I'll talk more about the front office.
Yeah, I mean, I think the title of the slide says it all, right? As an operator of a provider, because of the scaling challenges, because of the compression challenges, you need to be looking at ways to gain leverage within the business. And automation, from a more classic sense, some of which we help with, some of which we don't, which is more like workflow driven, status-based updates, things of that nature, it only gets you so far. It works, don't get me wrong. It only gets you so far in terms of that leverage piece. I think when we think about AI, we want to think about giving the service team superpowers. What can we do to take the administrative burden off of them? Time entries, data entry, things of that nature, all super important. Hydrates your business, so to speak, in terms of the quality of the data and an understanding of capacity. But is it the most important thing for your customers? Not always. And so what we want to do is alleviate that burden, that administrative overhead, to the extent that we can, so they can focus on what fills them up, what gives them energy, working with customers, doing what they do best, fixing technology challenges that are super hard, which I myself have never mastered. I know Mark was an analyst on the service desk, but that's our point of view, is that humans need to be in the loop, and it's not about replacing people. It's about empowering them to do their best work.
Yeah, and I think that's one of the core challenges that we get to. And maybe we can go into our beautiful futuristic slide. I think that folks are starting to chat about this question already, so it's exciting. If you hit the next slide, I think the question is, what is the risk tolerance, right? So as we start to think about this question, there's massive opportunity on the front office side, right? There's opportunity to get approvals automatically from the site contacts. There's opportunity, and where we think the holy grail is of course, is automatic resolution of tasks, right? But writing out the cons, we were really thinking about, like, why wouldn't you want this to happen? One thing that we always talk about in the when we introduce the MSP industry to other folks, that is interesting for us, because it's looking back at us, reflecting at us, is that unlike other industries, for us, service is the product. If you're selling sneakers online and you stand up a support desk for people to call, email, or chat into, they're typically asking about sneakers, right? And so that's the cost of doing business. For us, that's actually what we're selling. Like, the service is the product. And I think that what that does is it changes the risk profile for us significantly as an industry, where it's like, yeah, I might as well just try this bot that's going to basically refund any order that's less than $10, like Amazon does, because that's cheaper than me trying to get someone to just do the same. I'll spend more money on a human taking that interaction. Where for us, if that interaction goes poorly, then the chance of churn is pretty high. I don't know. I mean, Matt, I think back in our days, I think it was the #1 reason for churn was poor communication, poor service.
100%. We did do some backward-looking analyses, trying to figure out patterns in terms of ticket type, subtype, item combinations. If there was some kind of roadmap telling us like, hey, can we predict this churn? And really, it was a lot simpler than we even knew, which is if you're not setting expectations, if you're not following up, if things drop or are dropped, if you're not delivering based on those expectations or the customer's expectations, you're going to lose them. You're going to lose the customer. And I think that was the one commonality, is like, if their SLAs could be great, but if somebody asked for a new laptop and it didn't arrive on time, you had a problem.
Yeah. And I mean, I think for most MSPs I've spoken to, like, if you get a bad CSAT score on an experience off of a ticket, it gets escalated typically to the highest person, and it's this big ordeal. It's like committing a felony, a crime. You've done something terrible. So it's really important to us. So we understand that the risks are really high. And so I think our threshold for answering that question in another other industry might be, let's do it. For us, it's like, well, and Albert is running some funny things of what happens if the customer gets stuck with the AI, right? Talking to an auto attendant. And I think finally, even banks have made teleprompters that are simpler because of probably the amount of people that got stuck somewhere in that tree. Another technical aspect to bring in that I think folks in the MSP industry would be interested about is generative AI is completely different than the chatbots of the past. And we can get a little technical here. What I find astounding is that before we had essentially the teleprompter equivalent of chat, for example, where we would say, like, if the intent is to ask for, I need an M365 license, you would actually have to map out, like, when they ask this thing, give this answer. It was very much if this, then that. I think the big leap that's happened is generative AI is simply predicting the next best word as an answer to you. Even like the APIs, when we communicate with it, it actually just gives you a stream of consciousness of what it's thinking is the best next answer, not based on logic that we've necessarily given it. And so controlling that experience is actually now harder the other way, right? One way it's too stupid, where you get trapped inside of a teleprompter. The other way, it's so smart that you're now talking to it about whether Orlando is is the place to go on vacation, instead of can I get my M365 license applied? So it's very hard to create guardrails. So I think that's a new challenge that hasn't existed before. Curious, Matt, how you think about it in your relationship with AI, generative AI.
I think that's an excellent point. It's something that I wanted to make sure that we got to, which is there are strategies and ways to, and we've thought about this deeply, to put those rails in place. And I think a lot of that comes down to what's the context that you're hydrating as part of the prompt and the output. And then, as part of the prompt engineering underneath of it, having a standardized configuration of warmth, of p-values, things of that nature, based on the model that you're using and based on the desired output. It's really art meets science.
Yeah, and Albert, again, calling him out twice, he asked an interesting question about having to fine-tune the model. That, to your point of like creating these guardrails, We've tried fine-tuning the model in order to make it more MSP centric. What we have found that it actually gets dumber with our data because relative to the amount of you have to give it a lot of different types of use cases in order to even get close to the petabytes of data that it's taken on. So to your point, Matt, what we've been focusing on is giving it an MSP and IT context, because the internet has all, like, it's already solved most of the IT issues, because that's what we did as techs. Whenever we didn't know what the problem was, we'd Google it. So ChatGPT already read the internet. So I think we try to give it this context of, like, you're an IT agent, you're an IT bot, you're focused on this, and try to give it the right steering. I think we'll see, maybe not fine tuning, but we'll see intelligence, and we can talk about this afterwards. But that's a great question, Albert. The last thing on the con side that I want to talk about is we are truly the forgotten industry. I feel like consumer technology, consumer gets all the newest stuff first. Then you have enterprise IT, like the large Coca-Colas and large companies that get all of the cool features, bells and whistles. And then IT providers get it last, right? And I think it's a complexity because of, like, multi-tenancy. We need to be able to look at so many different customer environments. But right now, all of the real world solutions that I've seen, and I don't know, Matt, if you've seen others, but so far have been enterprise IT focused. Like, this is the one environment you have. And so we're going to try to build some kind of AI, some kind of intelligence, because it's one set of business line applications. It's M365, or it's not M365, but it's one thing. And so I haven't seen a lot of real world use cases for IT service providers. Have you seen MSP tools, or are you seeing more enterprise tools, Matt, on the A side?
Definitely. I mean, it depends on what you're looking at, right? Like, obviously we offer a lot of features that are delivering value today to partners, but in terms of, like, context aware applications and use cases, definitely more so on the enterprise side. To your point, the level of complexity in that multi-tenant environment, unless there's a really strong point of view on the information that it can access, what, where, when, why, and what that context means, like, as it relates to what you're asking for, which I'm sure all of that's being built right now in the channel, right? We have a lot of thoughts around solutions there ourselves. It's just not there yet. I think it'll get there for sure.
Yeah, and I mean, if you look at what MoveWorks is doing on the enterprise IT side, I mean, they're also committing a crime with the amount of money that they're charging. But in terms of the automation that they're driving, it's just amazing. But it's $100,000 per environment per year plus, and so that's just not achievable. They're able to figure out what you're asking in Teams and do the actual automation in the back end and write to ServiceNow, which is another $1 million per year contract. So it's quite early, I think, for MSPs, and so it's going to be very interesting to see how that ports over. I think, we want to start sharing some of our thoughts on how we think this is going to come down. Maybe if you go to the pros column real quick, Matt, on the slide before. So obviously this feels enticing, right? We all feel it. It's expensive, margins are thin. We know we need something, and it's very tempting. What we think about is that it's not all or nothing. So it's not like, do you actually get a bot to talk to your customers about everything on every case? I think it can be broken down and taken in a few different ways. So one framework that we've thought about is, like, job function, because there's multiple steps to a service lifecycle, right? Like, you start off saying, I have a problem, or I need a printer fixed, right? And then there's a triage step, whether that's a dispatcher or you have technicians picking it up right away. I think there's a lot of information collecting, like, what model is it? What printer are you trying to use? What PC are you on? Trying to understand the nature and the intent of the request. And then the other way to look at it, and Matt is Mr. Use Case at Thread, is by the use case. You want to talk a little bit about how you think about use cases, Matt?
Yeah, I mean, every time a customer gets in touch with you, it's because they either like something broke and they need it fixed in order to do their job, or it's a request, right? I need access to this platform. I need a new license. You were supposed to do maintenance for me this month and you didn't, so on and so forth. And I think the more of a defined point of view that MSPs have on which subset of use cases are best fit for that type of experience, and starting there with an understanding of like if the graph were urgency and complexity, probably starting on the lower urgency, maybe low medium complexity side of things, gives you an opportunity to say like, hey, these are probably the most frequent requests that are coming up. They're also probably the least administratively heavy or complex, right? We're not talking you need a CCIE certification in order to do this work. And then the back end of it is relatively little steps. If you can start there and say, start with password resets or, creating groups or users in 365, there's a lot of arbitrage, a lot of leverage that you can gain in so doing.
Yeah, and hopefully some parts of your business are more standardized than others as well, right? Maybe you do have really good standardization on M365, or you have good standardization on, phishing and spam tools that you could easily. I still don't know why we get all those requests as MSPs to say, can you release my mail from quarantine? It's like, you could do that yourself. But stuff like that, I mean, anywhere you have consistency in the way you're delivering service, I think those are great ways to look at the use cases as well. And just to make sure everyone's aware, I think the camps that we're in, I'm more aggressive on the let's talk to the customer side, and I think Matt's more, there's a lot more to do on the back office side. And here's where we want to start sharing what our thoughts are and some of the secret sauce about how I think this is all how we think it's gonna play down, based on my desire for radical customer interaction, and Matt is keeping me leveled off here by showing me real world examples. I think
to double click into that a little bit, I think somebody in the chat made this point earlier, it might have been Albert as well. Really, we don't want to introduce, like, if we're making changes to how customers are interacting with us, it can't be bad, right? It can't be a bad experience, or else they'll never go back to it. And so if we're introducing something that feels as big or as weighty as like, hey, now you have this excuse me, Acme MSP application in your environment that enables you to do or get some work done automatically, or set up licenses on your behalf. It's got to work, and it's got to be seamless. And I think that's where the friction comes in. Mark's like, you'll never get there if you don't build it or put it in front of them. I'm like, but it's got to be smooth.
Yeah, and I think that's the balance. But breaking it down, I think by role and by use case, has given us a really good understanding of where we think the beachhead is, like where can we get started and move from there. And we have some recommendations on Stack. If anyone has any questions, please feel free to ask. That we do have a lot of thoughts on RPA. Where does RPA fit into this as well, and how we progress into that as an industry. We try to keep things more industry specific versus like, this is what Thread does.
Yep.
We'll touch on some of that as well. I think what's really cool, yeah, if you go back and maybe set the frame of your crazy napkin drawing that Christoph brought to life.
Yeah, certainly. So as everybody who's on the call knows, yep, anytime that there's a request inbound, generally it's going through, certainly if it requires approval, it's going through a couple layers of context on both sides, right? Hits your service board or your queue, picked up by the dispatcher, they start it, categorize it, prioritize it, make sure it gets to the right person. Then when they're available, they start working on it. If they can't get to it, or if they need the customer in order to troubleshoot, takes more time. And so really what we were trying to illustrate here is like, it's like a 4D puzzle, right? The fourth dimension there being time. You're talking context with the provider, context with the customer, all of the technologies involved in orchestrating that experience. And then in addition to that, there's the concept of like chronological time, which is what the user is experiencing. And then there's SLA time, which is kind of like this magical non-state where you can actually pause time for a period and then restart it later on.
That's my favorite. We just report on SLA time. Yeah, we spent 53 minutes on it. We're completely in SLA, and the person on the other side has waited for a weekend,
Yep.
Friday night, maybe all of Friday. I mean, this looks like it was made by a DNA sequencing machine, but I just love how it portrays the different folks that are involved and kind of the statuses that it can get through on the left. And so there's a unique opportunity we found that we wanted to share with you all. And I can't wait to jump into Nate's question or Nate's point about our PAs there. There's this time where if you put away all the back office processes, there's a time between typically, right, and phone calls maybe bypass that to a certain extent, of routing the user to someone that can actually help them. That on an email, it may take some time for somebody to get to them in the queue. On a phone call, you could have someone that says, "Hey, we need to call you back." On chat, obviously, there is an amount of time from when the request comes in to someone on the other side responding. And we think that we can turn that perception of nothing into a place of opportunity. Because the human, as you're going into a service company, you're paying for the service. You're paying maybe $150, $200 a user a month. So you're expecting to get a human on the other side. But those moments, whether it's 5 minutes, 10 minutes, 15 minutes, but certainly right after that communication has started from the end user, so that they're thinking, like, this is important enough for me that I've decided I'm going to go and find that portal link and put in that request, for example, right? Or maybe chat, hopefully chat. There we can say, well, we can maybe collect some of that information, right? We were talking about this dispatcher role of how do we actually go to get the right amount of information in order to route the task properly and complete the task. So we think this is going to be the moment where things will first start to appear on the chatting with the customer side, where if you write, "Hey, I need access to a SharePoint site." If you can understand the intent of that, then what you can do is you can say, "Okay, great. So one of the required fields," and I think a lot of people think about this in terms of forms right now, right? That's why they have a preference for the portal. It's like, oh, I need request access to what? SharePoint site. Maybe there's like a conditional form. But the bots that we're seeing now can actually continue a conversation until they gather all the information that they need, which is super awesome. Like, this was just not possible before. You're like, if they need access to SharePoint, here are the things I need: the level of access, the SharePoint site URL, and let's say it has approver required, right? And so we think in that moment, we can gather a lot of the information. And if there's approval needed, how great would it be if it could automatically send an email or send a chat message to that site contact? And that's very low risk, because you're essentially saying, hey, I'm not stopping us from waiting for a human to get into the loop. That's the goal. The human's going to help you out. What we can do is let's try to get as much information so that when that person joins, we could get you service faster. And we think that's going to be massive. It's low risk, high reward. And, Matt, to your point earlier, is like, I think you should get in front of it and start at least practicing talking to the end customers to start getting better at it.
Yeah, I think back to the context aware consideration, that's really what it's doing, right? It's the intent is one piece, but at the same time, based on those cues, what you can do is start gathering information, recommended troubleshooting steps, which device it might be or is, like the KB articles related to it, and present it to the technician when it gets to them, right? The baseline, the level of information that they're getting is just so much higher than it probably would or could be with human intervention.
By the way, I think we got a 4-minute warning here. We're just really excited to keep talking. But yeah, and I think Nate brought up a great point. He said RPAs seem to be what will provide more value to MSPs over chatbots, especially when attached to forms. Once chatbots are better optimized and paired with RPAs, there will be a lot of efficiency gain for MSPs. I think that second point we really agree with, because I think the RPAs in the MSP industry, their challenge is to figure out all of that complexity with the different environments. One person has on-prem AD, one person has M365 or whatever it may be, different platforms, where we think that there's going to be a layer on the front that's going to try really focus on the service catalog, the intent mapping, trying to understand which pieces of information are needed in order to, because you need to figure out what's being asked for and then connect it to the right action, right? And so we think that it's kind of it's split into two parts, on the conversational workflow side and then the system workflow side.
Yeah, and that handoff is going to be really important to make sure that the experience again is seamless, that it doesn't feel like, a broken handshake or anything of that nature. Yeah,
and so Albert's saying that there's an issue of trusting. Maybe you can go down to I think the slides that's best is the recap and recommend one. Yeah, awesome. So Albert is saying, I agree, but there's still an issue of trusting the AI to understand the right divine correct intent. That there's a problem that what I think maybe even in our AI, I need a new printer becomes AI chooses a new user. There's a macro change happening in generative AI. You may be hearing more about agents versus assistants. The first generation of generative AI were truly co-pilots, right? And that's why Microsoft calls it a co-pilot, where essentially you have something that you're able to prompt the right way, and it just returns to you the information. And so where we think it's moving is agent-based, where there's a lot of tools like LangChain, and we're working a lot on this. We actually bring the intent model into play. So we're using a large language model like OpenAI and saying, here are the possible intents to map. And from that, we're building that trust. So we're actually feeding that to the AI. We're not asking it to come up with it on the fly, which I think is a little different based on the way that we're working with some of the types, subtypes, and items. But yeah, Matt, if you want to close out here, and we're happy to take on any questions and hang out for a few minutes if anyone has them.
Well, yeah, I think unfortunately we're going to get the boot here in a minute. We do, as you saw, as we skipped through a bunch of content, that we have a number of slides and a lot of thoughts behind even more scenarios and use cases. So I think maybe we do the next one in shorter than a month's time. I think we got to a lot of stuff, but I think there's a whole massive conversation to unpack underneath of it. But just to summarize quickly, these are the steps that we think about back at the MSP in the office that we shared, but also today when we think about starting an AI feature, an AI use case, or any automation initiative, is having a clearly defined and documented why behind it. Like, technology is fun. It's fun to stand up a POC and tinker, but if we don't have a clear strategy why behind it that we're trying to realize within the business, we can't define success. And then starting from that point of view, define ROI is exactly that. What are the outcomes that we want to drive? And what's the ROI we want to realize? Write that down, document it as part of the effort. And then lastly,
awesome, guys.
Yep.
Get him at. Lastly, one more.
Yeah, I would just say security. Think Azure OpenAI service or comparable platform. So there are compliance security controls underneath.
It's awesome. Yeah, maybe we should do a big topic about how to think about security with your AI vendors, what to ask them. This has been awesome. Maybe we'll do it sooner than a month. If you're here and you enjoyed this, connect with our team. Let us know other topics that you might want. The best place to do that is in the Thread Discord community. If you are not in the Thread Discord community, let us know. We'll send you an invite. Even if you're not using Thread today, happy to have you in there. A lot of people that were lighting the chat up are in there, and lots of opportunity. So we want to keep connecting. Lots of thoughts. Matt and Mark, you guys are awesome. Keep an eye out for future monthly magic webinar content, and excited to continue to connect with everybody.
Thanks so much.
Everybody, see you on the
Appreciate
next
it,
one.
guys.